Florence. The very name evokes images of soaring domes, breathtaking frescoes, and the birth of a cultural revolution that reshaped the world. But before the masterpieces, before Michelangelo etched marble into life and Leonardo dreamed of flight, Florence was a crucible of ambition, a city where money was not just currency, but the ultimate weapon, and power was a prize ruthlessly pursued. This isn't merely the story of art, it's the gripping saga of a family, the Medici, who understood this truth better than anyone, transforming a small republic into an empire, only to inevitably unravel under the weight of their own creation. Imagine Europe in the late 14th century, a continent still reeling from the Black Death, rife with feudal structures, and largely dominated by the church and warring monarchies. But in the heart of Tuscany, a different kind of power was quietly coalescing. Florence, a self-proclaimed republic, was a paradox, a city ostensibly governed by its citizens, yet increasingly dictated by the invisible hand of wealth. It was a bustling nexus of trade, renowned for its woolen textiles and, crucially, for its burgeoning financial ingenuity. Here, wealth was fluid, dynamic, and the old aristocratic titles were beginning to yield to the sharp minds of merchants and bankers. Into this vibrant, volatile landscape stepped Giovanni de' Medici. He was no swashbuckling warrior, no eloquent orator. Giovanni was a man of quiet calculation, a master of numbers, and perhaps most importantly, a master of people. He didn't seek open confrontation. His genius lay in cultivating influence, patiently, meticulously, like a gardener tending to a sprawling, intricate vine. His vision was clear: to establish a banking empire so vast, so intertwined with the very fabric of Europe, that it would become indispensable. The Medici Bank wasn't just another financial institution. Giovanni recognized that true power lay not in hoarding gold, but in its strategic deployment. He forged an audacious partnership with the most influential client imaginable, the papacy. At a time when the church condemned usury, Giovanni navigated this treacherous theological landscape with cunning, employing subtle accounting practices to become the primary financiers of the Holy See. Think of it, the very institution that preached against the pursuit of earthly riches was now powered by the Medici's financial engine. This wasn't merely a business deal, it was a foundational power play. This unprecedented alliance granted the Medici not only immense wealth, but also unparalleled diplomatic access and an intelligence network stretching across Europe. They managed the Pope's finances, collected his tithes, and dispersed his funds. This gave them leverage, information, and a distinct advantage over any rival. They became the logistical backbone of the church, making their operations not just profitable, but seemingly untouchable. It was a brilliant, almost insidious strategy that laid the groundwork for centuries of Medici dominance. A subtle yet profound subversion of traditional power structures. But Giovanni's ambition extended beyond mere profit. He understood that in a republic like Florence, direct political rule was fraught with peril. The city had a history of expelling families who grew too powerful. His approach was far more sophisticated. He would control the city not by holding titles, but by pulling the strings of those who did. He would lend money to influential guilds, to civic leaders, even to entire governments. These debts created bonds of obligation, weaving a web of dependency that slowly, inexorably, ensnared the Florentine political establishment. He cultivated a public image of quiet piety and civic responsibility, investing in public works, supporting local charities, and discreetly bailing out struggling businesses. This wasn't pure altruism. It was strategic generosity, building a reservoir of goodwill and political capital. When crucial votes arose in the Florentine Signoria, the Medici had an unspoken but undeniable influence. Their supporters, those indebted to them in various ways, subtly shifted the balance of power without any overt declaration of dominance. The ancient aristocratic families, the Albizzi and the Strozzi, watched with growing alarm as this new money family accumulated unprecedented power. The first sparks of conflict were not violent clashes, but whispered resentments, frustrated political maneuvers, and quiet anxieties. Giovanni de' Bicci, the architect of this silent revolution, carefully avoided the flamboyant displays that had undone other ambitious families. As Giovanni's life drew to a close in 1429, he left his son Cosimo the largest bank in Europe and a city teetering on a knife's edge. Between Republic and Medici Empire, Giovanni de' Bicci's legacy was a tightrope walk. Immense power carefully concealed beneath a veneer of republicanism. When his son, Cosimo de' Medici, inherited the mantle in 1429, the tightrope frayed. Cosimo was a different breed than his cautious father, sharper, more assertive, and possessing an even grander vision. He understood that to merely maintain the Medici's position was to invite challenge. So he had to consolidate, expand, and unequivocally assert their dominance within the rules of the Florentine Republic. The stage was set for collision. On one side stood Cosimo, the quiet financier and master strategist, whose strength lay in debt and loyalty. On the other stood Rinaldo degli Albizzi, a scion of Florence's old guard, a fiery orator, and a defender of the city's aristocratic heritage. The Albizzi saw the Medici as new money upstarts corrupting the ancient order, making this a clash of ideologies for the soul of Florence. Rinaldo degli Albizzi recognized the insidious nature of Medici power and saw how the Signoria was increasingly populated by men beholden to Cosimo. He observed the subtle shifts in policy, favorable treatment of Medici allies, and quiet exclusion of rivals, an invisible hand guiding the city's destiny. To Albizzi, Cosimo was not a mere citizen, but a silent prince in waiting. The tension escalated throughout the 1430s as the Florentine political arena became a battlefield of whispers, accusations, and proxy votes. Albizzi relentlessly worked to expose Cosimo's financial dealings, covert election influence, and supposed ambition to usurp the Republic. He tried to rally aristocratic families, painting Cosimo as a dangerous demagogue in a desperate gambit to strip the Medici of their support network. In 1433, Albizzi made his move, seizing an opportunity when Medici influence wavered. He orchestrated a coup within the Signoria. Cosimo was arrested, charged with treason against the Republic, and imprisoned high in the tower of Palazzo Vecchio. The stakes were monumental, as this trial could easily lead to execution, leaving Florence holding its breath. Even from his cell, Cosimo proved his strategic genius by subtly bribing his jailer to ensure his safety. Crucially, his carefully cultivated network sprung into action, with friends in the Signoria, bishops, and international merchants applying pressure. The city was divided between those baying for his blood and those fearing the economic collapse of the Medici Bank. The trial was a sham prolonged by manipulation, but ultimate pressure from Cosimo's vast web of influence proved too great. Instead of execution, the verdict was exile. Cosimo and his family were banished from Florence for 10 years. For Albizzi, it was a momentary triumph for the old guard, while for Cosimo, it was a strategic retreat he meticulously planned to reverse. During his year of exile in Venice, Cosimo did not sulk, but continued managing the Medici Bank's vast operations to prove Florence needed him. He continued to lend money, forge alliances, and subtly remind the city of his indispensable economic might. Without Cosimo's steady hand, Florence began to falter. Loans dried up, trade suffered, and political stability evaporated. The city's economy, so dependent on Medici financial muscle, slowly began to seize up. Discontent swelled in Florence as citizens, weary of instability and hardship, began to clamor for Cosimo's return. His allies within the new Signoria seized the moment, and in 1434, a council sympathetic to the Medici recalled Cosimo to Florence. His return was a triumph. Cosimo re-entered the city not as an outcast, but as a liberator greeted by cheering crowds. The consequences for his enemies were swift and devastating. Rinaldo degli Albizzi and his supporters were banished, their properties confiscated. This surgical removal of opposition sent a chilling message: challenge the Medici at your peril. While the Republican structure remained, Florence was now, in all but name, Cosimo de' Medici's personal domain. Cosimo ruled not as a duke or king, but as pater patriae father of the fatherland. He held no official titles beyond civic duties, yet every major decision bore his subtle imprimatur. He transformed Florence into a hidden principality, exercising power through patronage and the strategic distribution of wealth. He didn't dismantle republican institutions. He simply bent them to his will like a master puppeteer. This period saw the dawn of the Renaissance, an unprecedented explosion of art and architecture funded by Medici wealth. Cosimo understood that cultural patronage was a profound declaration of power, wealth, and legitimacy. The construction of Palazzo Medici and rebuilding of San Lorenzo were visual testaments to Medici prestige and their right to rule. Florence's identity became inextricably linked to the Medici, a bond forged in gold, ambition, and the silent coercion of a banking empire. Cosimo de' Medici, father of the fatherland, had cemented the Medici's hidden empire, weaving their influence so deeply into Florence's fabric that it seemed inseparable. But even the most carefully constructed edifice can crack under pressure, especially when the architect of its stability is gone. Cosimo's death in 1460 left his legacy in the hands of his less robust son, Piero, and then, crucially, to his grandson, Lorenzo. This was Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici, who would become the Magnificent, a name synonymous with the dazzling peak of the Renaissance. Yet, Beneath the veneer of artistic brilliance, Lorenzo's reign was a constant, brutal struggle to maintain a power that was inherently contradictory, ultimately leading to the dynasty's unraveling. Lorenzo inherited a city vibrant with artistic and intellectual ferment, a Florence transformed by Medici patronage. He was a polymath, a poet, a diplomat, a shrewd businessman, and a discerning patron of the arts. He was the embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, cultivating an image of enlightened leadership that dazzled Europe. Under his care, Florence became the undisputed cultural capital of the world, a magnet for geniuses like Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo. Yet, this cultural explosion was intertwined with a tightening grip on power, a delicate balancing act that required immense charisma, cunning, and occasionally ruthlessness. The core conflict, the tension between Republican ideals and Medici control, reached its violent climax in 1478 with the Pazzi conspiracy. This was no mere political maneuver. It was an assassination plot, orchestrated by rival banking families, elements within the papacy, and disaffected Florentine aristocrats, all desperate to break the Medici's stranglehold. The plan was audacious: kill Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during High Mass at the Florence Cathedral. In a shocking act of sacrilege, Giuliano was murdered at the altar. Lorenzo, though wounded, fought his way out, barricading himself in the sacristy, escaping certain death. The aftermath was a bloodbath as Florence erupted, not against the Medici, but in furious defense of Lorenzo. The conspirators were hunted down with unprecedented savagery. Archbishop Salviotti, a key plotter, was lynched from the Palazzo Vecchio windows. Still in his vestments, Lorenzo showed a chilling capacity for vengeance, ordering reprisals that shocked even his contemporaries. The Pazzi conspiracy was the moment the Medici stopped being merely influential citizens and became, in the eyes of many, the de facto rulers of Florence. This brutal retaliation didn't solve Lorenzo's problems. Pope Sixtus IV excommunicated Lorenzo and the entire Florentine government, placing the city under interdict. The Pope then forged an alliance with the King of Naples and launched a war against Florence. Facing an existential threat, Lorenzo undertook a daring diplomatic gamble by personally sailing to Naples to negotiate a separate peace with King Fronte. His courage and diplomatic skill prevailed, breaking the papal alliance and saving Florence from imminent destruction. This demonstrated that Medici power could be backed by immense personal risk and strategic brilliance. Despite these triumphs, the Medici system relied on a strong personality at its helm, a steady flow of funds, and careful public manipulation. Lorenzo's later years were marked by increased financial strain on the Medici Bank, due to lavish patronage and the costs of war and diplomacy. The foundations of Giovanni de' Bicci were slowly eroding through the internal demands of maintaining a principality disguised as a republic. Florence faced growing internal dissent as the fiery Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola rose to prominence. Savonarola railed against the city's perceived decadence, preaching repentance, asceticism, and the need for a truly Christian republic. His sermons resonated deeply, directly challenging the Medici's cultural and political narrative. Lorenzo died in 1492, just as Europe was on the cusp of profound change, serving as the catalyst for the first major expulsion of the Medici. His successor, his son Piero the Unfortunate, made disastrous concessions when King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy in 1494. Inspired by Savonarola's prophecies, the people rose up, banishing the Medici and looting their palaces. The Medici eventually returned to Florence multiple times with papal and imperial backing, shedding more of their republican pretense each time. By the 16th century, the Medici were no longer merely first citizens, but dukes and grand dukes of Tuscany openly ruling a hereditary monarchy. The Medici's legacy is a complex tapestry, proving the transformative power of art, finance, and strategic vision that propelled Europe into the modern age. Yet, their story serves as a potent cautionary tale about the insidious nature of power, paralleling modern financial institutions and megacorporations that exert unseen influence. The Medici dynasty's journey from humble bankers to grand dukes illustrates how money, manipulation, and the subtle erosion of democratic norms can transform leaders into autocratic rulers. Ultimately, unchecked power, however artfully concealed, alters the soul of a city and leaves behind a legacy that is as inspiring as it is profoundly unsettling.